I heard them planning my funeral. Right there in the sterile white hospital room between the smell of disinfectant and the steady pulse of the heart monitor. They stood so close to my bed, speaking in low voices, believing I was already gone. But I was still here, trapped inside my own body, hearing every word fall like stones against my chest. Michael's voice came first, deep, restrained, coldly exhausted. She suffered enough. Maybe it's time to let her rest. Then another voice, soft, sweet, and poisoned. You're right, Michael. She wouldn't want to live like this. You have to let go. Tara Lee, the young assistant I once thought admired him for his work. The girl who used to call me Miss Claire and pour wine at Christmas parties with that crystal-clear smile. Now she was standing over my bed, discussing how to release me, the legal wife of the man beside her. I wanted to rise, rip out the ventilator, scream that I was still alive. But my body wouldn't move. My eyelids were too heavy. My lips refused to part. Only my consciousness remained, sharp, terrified, and fully awake. Tara's heels clicked across the tile floor, syncing with the machine's beeping, beep, 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 a rhythm of betrayal. She whispered, as if performing a sacred act, "You've been too kind." She suffered long enough. Let her go. Then we can start over. My heartbeat spiked. The monitor quickened, but they didn't notice. Michael just sighed. The kind of sigh I'd heard before when he signed a failed contract or cut a loss, and now he sighed the same way, while cutting me loose. I once believed love could survive anything. Time, failure, difference. But love doesn't die from distance. It dies from calculation. Michael and I used to be Denver's perfect couple. He ran a thriving construction company. I taught literature at the local high school. He'd say, "You build worlds with words, and I build them with steel." We fit together like logic and poetry. Our nights were slow and warm. Cooking, music, poetry readings. He called me the calm in his chaos. Then Tara appeared, 29, beautiful, sharp, clever enough to praise at the right moment and smile on cue. Michael called her promising, loyal, driven. And I believed him, because betrayal never enters the room looking like betrayal. The night before the crash, I made his favorite meal, rosemary chicken, white wine, vanilla pudding. Dinner was quiet, too quiet. When I asked what was wrong, he said, "Just company issues." "I have to leave early tomorrow." He kissed my forehead and walked away. That kiss felt cold, empty, like a page where the words had been erased. The next morning, snow powdered the Denver streets. I drove home after a parent conference. When I reached the Maple Hill curve, I pressed the brake. The pedal sank to the floor. No sound, no grip, nothing. Metal hit stone, glass shattered like ice. Then, silence. When I woke, I was in the ICU. White lights, breathing tube, the sound of my own heart monitor, the only proof I was still alive. I don't know how long I was there, only that when I heard their voices, I realized I could no longer die, because I had to hear every word.
$4 million,
Tara murmured. "That's enough to clear your debts and relaunch the company." "I know," Michael answered, "as long as we follow procedure." "No one will suspect. 4 million. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted me erased, clean, like a completed project closed on schedule." I heard them discussing funeral songs, a small service, scattering ashes at sea. Her perfume hung in the air, sweet and nauseating. Everything was arranged. All that was left was for me to die, conveniently. I tried to move my lips, to make a sound, but the only thing that escaped was a tear, warm and real. That was when Nurse Emily walked in. She was the only person who spoke to me as if I were still there. "Miss Donovan, if you can hear me, blink," she said softly, smiling. "I know you're in there." I couldn't blink, but another tear fell. Emily froze, leaned closer. "You can hear me, can't you?" I wanted to scream yes, to grip her hand, but the machines answered for me. Emily's face changed. Her voice dropped. "Okay, Miss Donovan. I'll come back. I promise." She squeezed my hand, and for the first time since the crash, I believed someone might still see me. That night, I didn't sleep. I heard everything. The hum of air vents, Tara's heels down the hall, Michael's voice outside the room. "Dr. Patel says we can disconnect the machines in 2 days." "Good," Tara replied. "I can't wait any longer." She said "I," as if I'd never existed, and right then, I made a vow. They would hear me, one way or another. People say silence is weakness. They're wrong. Silence is strategy. I couldn't speak or move, but I had something they underestimated. Time. Time to listen. Time to remember. Time to wait. When Emily returned the next morning, she placed her hand on my shoulder. "Don't worry, Claire," she whispered. "I believe you. We'll find a way." She didn't know it then, but those words kept me alive. Because when even one person believes you still exist, you're not gone. Not yet. If you're listening to this story, maybe you too have stayed silent in the face of injustice. Maybe someone made you feel invisible. But believe me, silence isn't the end. It's the beginning of justice. If this story touched you, comment where you're listening from, because somewhere out there, someone still needs proof that they matter. And I, Claire Donovan, the woman they believed was dead, have started to speak again. This is how. From silence, and from the very sound of betrayal. That night, after Emily left the room, I lay still, listening to the hiss of the ventilator merge with my heartbeat. The world around me felt like a frozen dream. But inside that stillness, memories began to surface, piece by piece, sharp enough to hurt. Before everything collapsed, I had what most people would call a perfect marriage. Michael and I were the kind of couple neighbors envied, the pair that looked effortlessly aligned. I still remember those autumn mornings when fog covered our backyard. He'd hand me a cup of coffee and joke, "If I get to start every day with you, I don't need to go anywhere else." And I believed him. I believed in the way he looked at me, the way he held my hand through every hard season. I believed that marriage was an alliance. Two people against the world, not against each other. We met in the winter of 2010 at a city library fundraiser. I was reading Sylvia Plath. He was the guest sponsor funding a new reading wing. I spoke about the power of words. He spoke about the strength of brick and steel. And somewhere between the two, we found a language of our own. Michael wasn't a talkative man. He was measured, disciplined, with eyes that made people trust him instantly. When he proposed, I didn't hesitate. The wedding was small. Friends, family, sunlight through stained glass. He squeezed my hand at the altar and said, "No matter what happens, I'll never let go." And I believed him. The first years were golden. We lived in a small wooden house on the edge of Denver, with a maple tree in the front yard and fairy lights strung around the porch. I taught literature at Westmont High. He ran Donovan Construction. I still remember how proud he sounded whenever he talked about his projects, as if every beam carried his name. In the evenings, he'd sit on the couch with his laptop while I curled up beside him with a book. Sometimes he'd look over and say, "I can't believe I got this lucky, Claire." And I'd smile, believing that love could be as strong as the concrete he built with. We weren't rich, but we were steady. One home, one pickup truck, a lavender garden outside the kitchen window. I thought happiness was that simple, not glamorous, just safe. But happiness, like concrete, only holds when the foundation doesn't crack. And I never noticed the first fractures forming. Subtle, precise. The day Tara walked into his life. She was the new intern, young, sharp, with the kind of gaze that lingered just a second too long. Michael introduced her at a company dinner. "Tara's the best employee I've ever had," he said, proud. She shook my hand, smiled brightly. "I've heard you teach literature. That must be so inspiring." I smiled back, but in that brief moment, I saw how their eyes met. Quick, electric, dangerous. After that, Michael started coming home later. At first it was meetings, then reports, then Tara needs guidance. He changed his cologne, his clothes, his phone password. One night I asked, "You okay? You seem tired lately." He smiled faintly. "Just work, Claire. Don't worry." And I believed him, or pretended to, because I was afraid I was right. By the next spring, he was traveling more. One day, I found a hotel receipt from Aspen. 2 guests, 1 room. When I asked, he said, "Accounting error." I nodded, but inside, something hollowed out. I wasn't naive. I'd taught too many stories to not recognize the script of betrayal. But I still hoped, because marriage, I thought, was something you repaired, not replaced. Then came the day I stopped hoping. I visited his office unannounced. The door was closed, but I heard laughter, light, intimate, unmistakable. When the door opened, they stood apart, but the air between them told the truth. Michael froze for half a second, then smiled. "You're early." We were just wrapping up a project. I nodded and walked away. That night, I still cooked dinner, not because I forgave him, but because I needed to see if the man across from me was still my husband or just a stranger wearing his face. He barely ate, couldn't meet my eyes, and when he said, "I'm tired, I have to leave early tomorrow," I knew. We had already crossed the point of no return, but I didn't know the betrayal ran deeper than love. It reached my life itself. I remember that morning vividly. Denver sky gray, rain misting the windshield. I turned on Fields of Gold, the song he'd sung at our wedding. At the Maple Hill curve, I pressed the brake. The pedal dropped straight to the floor. No sound, no grip, nothing. In that split second, I realized this wasn't an accident. Then came the crash, the shatter, the dark. Now, in this frozen ICU, I understand everything had been arranged. Michael didn't just want freedom. He wanted erasure. A clean slate with no trace of me. And Tara? She was the silent witness, and the match that lit the fuse. I heard them discuss every detail, every dollar. They planned their move to Miami, their Ocean View condo, their new beginning, funded by $4 million of my death. But I'm still here. I hear, I remember, and I will collect every piece of evidence. I don't know how long it will take to reclaim my voice or my power, but I know this: justice doesn't rush. It builds, brick by brick, fact by fact, and when it arrives, it wears the face of truth. If you've ever looked at a perfect marriage, don't trust the picture. Sometimes the brightest part of the frame is just the reflection of a blade. If you're still listening, keep going, because from here on, every secret will surface, layer by layer, and this will no longer be the story of a victim. It will be the story of a survivor. That night, Rain fell over Denver, as if the whole city was trying to wash away something filthy. I gripped the steering wheel, still heavy from our cold, silent argument. Michael had said he'd be home late. Urgent meeting with the contractors. I knew exactly which contractor he meant. Streetlights blurred against the wet windshield, long streaks of light cracking like fractures through memory. I turned on the radio. Fields of Gold played softly, but beneath the melody was something else. A strange knowing, the sense that this song might be the last thing I'd ever hear. I remember every detail of that night, every breath, every whisper of wind against the glass. There are moments in life when you don't realize you're standing between life and death, until everything around you goes silent. As my car reached the Maple Hill curve, I pressed the brake. The pedal sank. No resistance. I pressed harder. Nothing. My whole body locked. Part of me insisted it was the rain, a mechanical fault, something explainable. But the deeper part already knew. The car shot downhill like a bullet leaving the chamber. Headlights cut through the rain, shards of silver slicing the night. I jerked the wheel, trying to steady the skid, but the road was slick as glass. Then came the screech, metal into stone, glass exploding like crystal, every sound sharp enough to draw blood. In that instant, I saw Michael again, smiling, at our 10th anniversary dinner. He poured wine, looked at me, and said, "You're the best thing that ever happened to me." Now I understood. A man can tell the truth only until he finds something he wants more than truth itself. When I opened my eyes, everything was white. No sound, no edges, only weight, and the steady beep, beep, beep of a machine pretending to be a heartbeat. I tried to move. Nothing. My body was a coffin I couldn't climb out of. My throat was dry, but I couldn't even swallow. They say that when you're close to death, you see light. I didn't. I saw only blankness. And inside that blankness, memories crept back. A missed call, an averted glance, a quiet warning. "Don't drive tonight," Michael had said before I left. "I have a bad feeling." I'd laughed, thinking he was tired. But now, in this sterile room, I realized that bad feeling wasn't fear for me. It was fear that his plan might fail. Voices drifted around me, muffled and distant, as if I were hearing them from underwater. Heart rate stable, no motor response. Intubate. Don't let her crash. I wanted to scream, "I hear you!" to move a finger, anything. But the body didn't listen. Only my mind stayed awake, clinging to the world by sound alone. Then a voice, calm, familiar, low. "I'm her husband." "Thank you, Doctor." Michael. His hand touched mine, warm, steady. For a second, I believed he loved me. Then came the words that shattered it all. "If she doesn't wake up, I don't want her to suffer. What's the most peaceful way to let her go?" My heart stopped for a beat. He wasn't asking for mercy. He was requesting a method. The days that followed blurred together. No sunrise, no sunset. Only machines, whispers, and betrayal on repeat. I heard Tara's perfume before her voice. "No one suspects anything," she said lightly. "The report says brake failure." "I checked everything," Michael replied. "It's clean." His tone was calm, professional, as if my death had been another project closed ahead of schedule. I wanted to believe I'd misheard, but I hadn't. I remembered every word. They say silence reveals character. Lying there, I met the truest versions of both of them. At night, when the ICU lights dimmed, their voices drifted back. Tara sometimes came alone, placing cheap vanilla-scented flowers by my bed. Her whisper floated over me. "If you can hear this, I'm sorry." But that apology wasn't for me, it was for her own conscience, to make it easier to wait for me to die. Then, one morning, a different voice, warm, uneven, alive. "Good morning, Miss Donovan." Emily said softly. "It's cold out there today." "You'd love it." She talked to me every day about her cat, her mother's cactus garden, her dream of studying in Italy. Each word was a drop of water hitting desert sand. I couldn't respond, but I listened. I stored it. She had no idea her voice was the only thing keeping me from disappearing completely. One night, after Emily left, I heard Michael again, speaking to Dr. Patel. "If she doesn't wake in 14 days, can we remove the ventilator? We need more time. She wouldn't want this. I'm only trying to do what's right for her." What's right? He called my death right. I used to tell my students, words can save a life or end one, depending on who speaks them. Now I understood that truth in the cruelest way possible. The man I loved was using compassion as cover for murder. If you ask what it feels like to be trapped between life and death, it's like being locked inside a burning house while your screams exist only in your head. You see everything. You hear everything. But no one hears you. I lived in that fire for 14 days. 14 days of hearing the man I loved plan my death. 14 days of realizing love can turn into a life insurance policy. Then came day 15. The first light slid through the hospital window. A hand touched mine, warm, trembling. "Miss Donovan," Emily whispered, "let's try something today. If you can hear me, blink." I gathered everything I had left, every ounce of will. A single muscle moved. My eyelid trembled. Emily froze, then gasped. "You heard me!" Tears filled her eyes as she ran for the doctor, but to me, her voice sounded like the crack of thunder breaking hell open. Because in that moment, life, however fragile, had been handed back to me. If you're listening now, remember this. Sometimes the smallest act, a blink, a tear, can overturn the verdict of fate. Never underestimate the power of still being here, to listen, to wait, to prove that silence can fight back. And I, Claire Donovan, am not done. Not that night. Not when the car exploded. Not when they thought I was dead. That was only the beginning of justice. When Emily cried, I knew something had actually changed. This wasn't vague hope or useless tears anymore. For the first time since the night of the crash, my body responded. A tiny twitch in my eyelid, something that should have meant nothing, was enough to make another human being believe I was still alive. Emily gripped my hand, her voice shaking with emotion. "Miss Claire, I knew it. I knew you were still here. We're going to figure out how to talk, okay?" If I'd been able to cry, I think I would have, but the tears wouldn't come anymore. My body was still a cage, no movement, no voice, just consciousness and the scattered sounds of the ICU, serving as the only proof I still existed. Dr. Patel came in, checked my pupils with a pen light. His voice was low, steady. "Good, Miss Donovan. Neurological response. You're fighting." I heard that word, fighting, and yes, that was exactly what I was doing. I was fighting to reclaim a life someone had already tried to erase. In the days that followed, Emily was patient, the kind of patience only someone who has known helplessness can possess. She came up with a way for us to communicate, using blinks. She wrote the alphabet on a plastic sheet and taught me how to speak by blinking when she landed on the right letter. C, I blink, once. H, I blink again. A, another blink. She frowned, sounding it out. C-H-A. Cha? I blinked harder. Cha, do you mean why run quote? I blinked rapidly. She squeezed my hand. "No, Claire, you're not going to run. You're going to live. and I'm not going to let them hurt you." She said it like a vow, like someone who had sworn long ago never to stand by and watch another victim stay invisible. I don't know how to fully explain what it feels like to be buried alive inside your own body, where every breath is a suppressed emergency call. Day after day, I listened. Machines, doctors, shoes in the hallway, and the private conversations I was never meant to hear. One evening, Michael walked in. I knew it was him from the sound of the door, the weight of his footsteps, and the faint trace of his old cologne, the same one he used on our early dates. He sat down in the chair, exhaled. "I never wanted it to end like this, Claire," he said quietly, like he was confessing. "You have to understand. I couldn't handle more pressure. The projects, the debt, the investors. I've done everything I could." I wanted to laugh. Pressure. He was calling me pressure. The man who once told me, "You're the best part of my life," was now talking about me like a loss column that needed to be written off. He went on. "Tara just helped me see things more clearly. She makes me feel alive. And you just want to rest, don't you?" That was the first time I truly understood. Michael didn't regret what he'd done. He was trying to convince himself that killing me was kindness. When he left, Emily came in. She looked at me, eyes bright but suddenly darker underneath. "He was here again, wasn't he?" she asked, as if she could feel it. I blinked, once. "I heard him talking in the hall." "Don't be afraid, I'm going to help you." She pulled a small, old phone from her pocket, lowering her voice. "They don't believe me, but I believe you. If there's a way, I'm going to record what he says." I wanted to shout, "Don't risk it," but my body refused. All I could do was blink slowly, hoping she'd understand. "Thank you." Emily leaned in close to my ear. "I had a younger sister once. She was a victim of abuse. No one believed her. I swore I would never let that happen again." Her eyes glistened in the dim ICU light. I couldn't speak, but I knew. Right then, we had just become allies. The rhythm changed after that. Michael came less often. Tara started to sound nervous. I heard her in the hallway, her voice low and tight. "Have you talked to the doctor yet? This is taking too long." Michael answered, flat. "I'm waiting for the right moment." I didn't know what the right moment meant to them, but I knew this. Emily was moving. One morning, when it was just the two of us, she whispered, "They think you can't hear, but I'm going to leave the phone here. I'll record every conversation they have around you." I couldn't believe a young nurse would risk that much, but I heard the steel in her voice. I wasn't alone anymore. A week passed. I got better at talking with my blinks. Emily would read through the alphabet. I'd fight my own muscles to piece words together. It took hours, but we were relentless. One morning, she started again from the top. I spelled HECUT. She froze. "You're saying he cut ? I blinked hard. She grabbed another sheet of paper, hand trembling. "He cut what?" Letter by letter, I forced it out. BRAKES. When she finally read it out loud, "He cut the brakes?" Her tears spilled over. "Oh my God, Claire, you're telling me he cut your brakes?" I blinked once. She set the pen down, her hand shaking. "I'm going to the police. I promise." That night, for the first time, I slept without reliving the crash. Instead, I dreamed of wind. I was standing on a hill above the city, hair whipped by the air, and in the dream, I could finally speak. "I'm still alive." When I woke, Emily was at my bedside, smiling. "You slept," she said softly. "I messaged someone I know at the department. We're going to have someone who actually listens." I looked at her, and in my head I repeated one word. We. Not I anymore. That afternoon, Michael came again. He sat closer than usual, voice low. "I've made a lot of mistakes, Claire, but sometimes ending something is the only way someone can be free." I heard the chair scrape, heard him stand. His hand rested on mine. "I'll take care of everything. I promise." His fingers felt cold. Not ICU cold, a different kind of cold. The kind that comes from a body that stopped carrying a soul. When he left, the soft click of the door sounded exactly like a coffin lid sliding shut. Then Emily came in. "I heard enough," she said quietly. "I've got him on tape." She set the small phone on the tray, the screen still pulsing with the recording icon. "He confessed, Claire. And next time he comes into this room, it won't just be you and me here." I looked at her. A single tear slipped from the corner of my eye. For the first time, it wasn't from fear. It was from something else. Hope. If you're listening to this, understand this. Silence is never useless. Silence is where justice drafts its first motion. It's where the people you underestimate start preparing their counterattack. And I, Claire Donovan, am still lying in the bed they assumed was my grave. But now, this place they thought would bury me has become the first battlefield of the truth. There were nights I stayed awake, not because of pain, but because of fear, because I knew they were still out there. Michael and Tara, two people who had plotted to take my life, were still walking free in a world I could no longer reach, speak to, or defend myself in. But Emily, the small nurse with the lion's heart, kept showing up every morning. She changed the bandages, adjusted the IV, and while every other doctor believed I was still in a coma, she leaned close and whispered, "Just hold on a little longer, Claire." I'm gathering proof. She wasn't lying. One cold morning in early February, I heard the door open. Michael walked in, and Tara was with him. I knew them instantly. Her cheap floral perfume, his polished shoes stopping right by my bed. Tara spoke first, her voice soft as honey, but sharp as metal underneath. "The insurance company needs one more document confirming she's in a vegetative state. I told them Dr. Patel's working on it." Michael replied, calm and firm. "Once Patel signs, the money transfers to the company account. $4 million. We'll split it the old way. $4 million. I wanted to scream, to tear out the IV, to sit up and tell them I was still here. But my body refused. Tara giggled, the same brittle laugh I remembered from office parties when she flirted over wine. "Then we can finally leave Denver. I've been looking at condos in Phoenix. The light there is perfect." "Don't talk about that here." Michael snapped. She could still hear you. Silence, then Tara's sneer. "Here?" "She's gone, Michael. All that's left is the shell." After they left, Emily came in. Her face was pale. She had heard. She shook her head, voice trembling. $4 million. God, Claire, they're cashing in your death." She sat down beside me, gripping my hand. "We already have one recording, but it's not enough. I need more. I need them to confess again." I blinked twice, our signal for yes. She smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened with fear. 2 days later, she brought a small item, a pen. But not just any pen, a pen with a hidden microphone. She leaned close, her whisper barely audible. "Next time they visit, I'll leave this on the table. It'll record everything. I'll take it to Detective Owens once we have enough." I tried to tell her it's too dangerous, but all I could do was blink rapidly. She understood. Her hand rested gently on my shoulder. "I know, but you deserve justice, and I won't let them win." That afternoon, Tara returned, alone. She wore a long coat, dark sunglasses, and carried a bouquet of white lilies. "Michael's in a meeting," she said, voice syrup smooth. "I just came to say goodbye." She sat down, studying my face as though I were an object about to expire. "You know, Claire," she said, "he once told me you were the smartest woman he'd ever met. But smart, without strength, might as well be stupid." I blinked, not to communicate, but to keep tears from falling. "He chose me," she continued softly. "He deserves a fresh start." She leaned in close, her breath touching my ear. "Goodbye, teacher. You'll be resting soon." Then she walked out, leaving behind the heavy scent of lilies, the smell of funerals. Moments later, Emily appeared from the hallway. She'd been listening. "I've got it," she said, voice trembling but firm. "Every word. I'm sending it to Detective Owens. They'll be here soon." She stood there for a long time, tears balanced on her lashes. "Claire, they won't kill you. Not this time." That night, the hospital was quiet. Metal wheels rolled softly down the corridor. Monitors beeped in rhythm, and wind whistled faintly through the window seams. For the first time, I wasn't afraid. Because fear now had a face, it had a name, it had a $4 million price tag and a countdown. The next day, Michael returned, alone. His coat was dark, his expression hollow. He stood at my bedside for a long time, searching for the woman he'd once pretended to love. "Dr. Patel will sign today," he said finally. "After that, you'll be at peace." At peace. He said it like mercy, but every syllable dripped with intent. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. He sat down, pulled out his phone, and called Tara. "It's done. Tomorrow. Get the paperwork ready." The call ended. The silence afterward was surgical, precise, deliberate. He left. Emily didn't come in right away. She was letting him incriminate himself further. An hour later she appeared, breathless, pale, yet triumphant. "Claire, he said enough. 3 full recordings. Detective Owens will be here tonight." She squeezed my hand, her voice cracking. "They don't realize it yet, but your silence is the strongest evidence we have. They think you can't hear, can't remember, but we'll show them. Truth has structure." That evening, my room stayed lit. Emily sat beside me, reading over her report to Detective Owens, her lips moving like a quiet prayer. "I know I'm taking a risk," she whispered, "but you were the first person who believed me, even when you couldn't speak." I wanted to say thank you, but all I managed was a single tear. She smiled softly. "That's your way of saying it, right?" She brushed it away with her cold hand, then whispered one last time. "Don't worry, Claire. Tomorrow they'll hear your voice, not through your mouth, but through the truth." That night, I dreamed differently. No screeching brakes, no headlights, no whispers of death, just wind across a frozen field, and the sound of footsteps, slow, heavy, but steady. In that dream, I heard my own voice again. "Claire, your silence has become your weapon." And when I opened my eyes to the pale light of dawn, Emily was sitting beside me, smiling. "Good morning, warrior." She said it softly, and for the first time since the crash, I believed it. The fight wasn't just to survive anymore. It was for justice. The next morning, the pale blue light of dawn slid through the blinds and washed across the white sheet like a thin layer of frost. Emily stepped into my room earlier than usual. She wasn't in her standard white scrubs. She wore a gray jacket over them, hood pulled up, hiding most of her hair. Her face was too serious for it to be just another morning. She set a small black phone on the bedside table, her fingers trembling slightly. "They've heard everything," she said quietly. "Detective Owens and Vega, they believe me, but they want to be sure he comes back. They want him to incriminate himself again before they move." She paused, glancing at the monitor where my heart beat out a cold, mechanical rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. It sounded like it belonged to both of us. I'm going to have to bait him, she continued, and that is going to be dangerous. I wanted to object. I wanted to say, "Don't risk your life for me, Emily," but my body stayed motionless, a slab of flesh trapped between life and death. Instead, I blinked twice our signal for yes. She leaned down, her lips close to my ear. "If anything happens to me, remember this truth will still stand. I've already sent all the recordings to the police." A cold line ran down my spine, not from fear, from the knowledge that in this world, the only people who dare to believe in justice are usually the first ones to pay for it. That evening, Michael came back. I recognized his footsteps long before he reached the door. Slow, deliberate. The sound of someone walking toward a casket instead of a bed. He didn't bring flowers. No papers. Just a thick envelope in his hand. Patel signed. He said quietly, "Tomorrow, this all ends." He sat down, laid the envelope on the table and let his fingers glide over it like it was something precious. "Tara says you look more peaceful now," he murmured. "Maybe this is for the best." "I promise, Claire. I'll take care of everything." He laughed then. A hollow, empty sound. The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. For one brief second, I wanted to close my eyes so I wouldn't have to look at him. But that's when Emily walked in. Her voice was calm, professional, as if she knew nothing. "Good evening, Mr. Donovan. Visiting hours are almost over. I need to check the equipment before lights out." Michael nodded, trying to sound casual. "Thank you. I'll just be a few more minutes." Emily moved to the bedside table, placing the pen with the hidden mic right next to the envelope. She checked the IV line, her eyes never fully leaving him. "If you need anything, I'm at the nurse's station," she added. She left, but I knew she hadn't gone far. Behind that door, she was listening, recording, waiting. Michael sat, opened the envelope, paper rustled. A sheet slid out and landed on the table, right beside the pen. "Withdrawal of life support," he said under his breath. "All it needs is a signature. Tomorrow, you'll finally be released." I heard the click of the pen. Ink met paper. My heart clenched. Each stroke of his hand dragged across the page like a deliberate incision, a written execution order with my name on it. The door opened again. Emily stepped back in, feigning surprise. "Oh, sorry, I forgot the glove box." Michael jerked, shoving the paper back into the envelope. "It's fine," he said. "I was just leaving." She bent, picked up the gloves from the drawer, eyes flicking for half a second toward the envelope. "Good night, Mr. Donovan." "Good night, nurse." He left. The door clicked shut behind him. Emily went straight to the table, grabbed the pen, checked the screen. Recording saved, 17 minutes. She exhaled, her shoulders sagging as if she'd been holding up the ceiling. "We've got it, Claire," she whispered. "He signed off on pulling your life support. That's premeditated murder. I'm sending it in tonight." 2 hours later, Detective Owens arrived with another officer. Plain clothes, neutral faces, the kind of men who walk into rooms and change lives for a living. I heard their footsteps stop outside, then Owens' voice. "Miss Hart, we're installing a hidden camera in the room. He'll come back in the morning. Count on that. You just do your job like normal." "Yes, sir," Emily replied. "But if he suspects anything..." "You won't be alone," Owens said. "We'll be downstairs. As soon as he's here, all you have to do is signal." I heard every word. Relief and adrenaline collided in my veins. Tomorrow. It would all come to a head tomorrow. That night, I couldn't sleep. The beeping of the monitor seemed louder, more urgent, like the ticking of a clock in a courtroom. I thought of Emily, this small nurse who had put her job, her license, and possibly her life on the line for a woman who couldn't even say thank you out loud. No one had called her a hero. No one would put up her picture in a hallway. But to me, she was the only thing standing between me and a silent burial. I remembered how she wiped my tears without flinching, how she looked straight into my eyes every morning and said, "You're going to live, Claire." I promised my sister no one else would die in silence. I had never met her sister. I didn't know her story. But because of Emily, I understood something. Justice doesn't just come from courts. It comes from the people who refuse to look away. Early dawn. The corridor filled with the soft rumble of rolling gurneys, muted voices, pages flipping on clipboards. The door opened quietly. Emily walked in with a steaming cup of coffee. Her voice was barely above a murmur. "They're downstairs. When Michael comes in, I'll signal by asking the time. That's their cue." I blinked once, understood. She smiled faintly. "I know you're scared, but this time he'll have to listen to his own voice." She slid a second, smaller recording pen under the edge of the bedside tray, invisible beneath the linen. 9 a.m. The door opened. Michael walked in with a file bag and that same counterfeit smile. "I just wanted to see you one last time," he said. "After this, you'll be at peace." He took out the paperwork, laid it flat, uncapped his pen. "Tara's waiting in the parking garage. They'll call me when it's done." Emily entered right on cue. "Good morning, Mr. Donovan. It's 9:14 a.m., correct?" He froze for a fraction of a second. "Yeah, why?" "Just noting observation time," she replied smoothly. "Coffee's a bit strong today. Can I get you a cup?" "No thanks. I won't be long." He bent over the document to sign again. Emily slipped out the door. I heard the faint click of the nurse call button, the agreed signal. 30 seconds later, the door burst open. Owens and Vega stepped in, badges out. "Michael Donovan, you're under arrest for attempted premeditated murder. Put the pen down." He froze, color draining from his face. You have no proof." Emily stepped forward, placing the tiny pen on the table between them. "We have everything, Mr. Donovan. Your voice, your words, your signature." It happened fast. Handcuffs, Miranda writes, the soft rasp of metal on skin. He looked back at me, eyes empty, lips split with the pressure of his own teeth. "You win, Claire," he said hoarsely. "But remember, I only did what had to be done." They dragged him out. The door closed. I lay there, staring at the sliver of light from the window. And for the first time since the crash, I took a real breath. Emily stayed by the bed, her hand still shaking. "It's over, Claire," she whispered. "He won't hurt anyone again." I looked at her, tears spilling over. She laughed weakly, voice raw from the adrenaline. "You didn't just survive, Claire. You won." And I believed her, because that morning, in a cold room at St. Augustine, justice didn't enter with a judge's gavel. It walked in on trembling hands, hidden microphones, and the courage of a nurse who refused to accept silence as a cause of death. From that moment on, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never forget that face. The angel in scrubs. After Michael's arrest, the ICU felt eerily quiet. No more leather shoes clicking across the floor. No more heavy cologne dripping with lies. Just the steady pulse of the monitor, each beep echoing the rhythm of a life reclaimed. Emily stood by the window, watching the snowfall. Her shoulders trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the weight of everything that had just happened. When she turned back to me, her eyes were red, but her gaze still carried light. "The police will take my statement in the morning," she said softly. "They're keeping the original recordings for forensics. I made a copy for you." I couldn't speak, but my eyes thanked her. She understood, resting her hand gently on mine. No one can ever forget this, Claire. You're not just a victim. You're living proof that justice still works. That afternoon, Detective Vega arrived. He carried a file bag and a small silver flash drive. "This is a copy of the recording," he said. "You can listen to it, if you're ready." Was I ready? Could I really listen to the voice of the man who tried to end me? Emily plugged in the drive, and as the first sound played, the air in the room tightened. "Michael, she suffered enough. Sometimes, death is the only mercy left. Tara, you sound like you pity her." "Michael, pity, not love. I love you, Tara." "Tara, then sign it. Let's start our future." Their voices, clear, sharp, emotionless, slid under my skin like needles of ice. Then came the sound of a pen scratching paper, a laugh, and the line that burned itself into me forever. "Michael, tomorrow she'll sleep peacefully. That nurse means nothing." Emily's fingers tightened around mine. "You heard that, right? They weren't just going to kill you, Claire. They were planning to get rid of me, too." I blinked twice, hard. She nodded, voice steadier now. "They didn't succeed. Now they're the ones locked away." Vega closed the laptop, his tone deliberate and calm. "Miss Donovan, the preliminary hearing is in 2 weeks. Your attorney, Jennifer Cole, will represent you. She wants to meet as soon as possible." Jennifer, my sister. Her name echoed through me like a bell from childhood. The sister who used to defend me from every storm. Now fate had brought her back, this time as my legal protector. When Vega left, Emily sat down beside my bed. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her voice was firm. "You know, Claire, I never believed in miracles, but when I saw him in handcuffs today, I started to. If miracles had a face, I thought, they would look exactly like hers. A young nurse with brave brown eyes and a voice steady enough to hold back the dark. You didn't just survive," she said softly. "You won. And I'll stay until you can speak again." A week later, as I began speech therapy, Emily was still there. Each morning, she helped me shape words with trembling lips. Each evening, she read the news aloud while I listened, and every time she stepped into the hallway, I'd catch her voice, low and tired on the phone. "I'm okay. I just need to make sure she's safe. Yeah, I'll come home soon." That's when I realized she had a life beyond these sterile walls. Someone who waited, someone who worried, and still, she stayed. Saturday night, Jennifer arrived. She wore a long coat and carried a thick folder. "Claire," she whispered, her voice shaking, "you did so well." I smiled with my eyes. She sat down, opened the folder. Police found the brake-cutting tool in Michael's storage unit. His fingerprints and Tara's are all over it. They're both being charged with attempted murder and insurance fraud. She paused, looking at me. "If it weren't for that nurse, you wouldn't be here." Emily only smiled faintly. "I just did the right thing." Jennifer shook her head. "No, you did something extraordinary. And my family owes you everything." After Jennifer left, Emily sank into the chair by my bed. The warm yellow light caught her face. "You know, Claire," she said quietly, "people think stories like this only exist in movies. But reality can be crueler and more miraculous." I blinked agreement. "They'll play the recording in court," she continued. "His voice will be the very thing that destroys him." She looked at me, her tone gentle but resolute. "I'm not afraid anymore. The moment you opened your eyes and looked at me, I realized nothing stronger than the gaze of someone who survived." A single tear fell onto my hand, warm and real. I tried to squeeze her fingers, just once. She smiled. "I know, Claire. I know." That night, I didn't dream of the crash. I dreamed of sunlight, a bright room, Emily sitting by the window reading a newspaper. In the dream, she looked up and asked, "What will you do when you leave here?" And I answered, "I'll tell the story." When I woke, I heard her outside speaking with Vega. "She's recovering fast," she said. "Might be discharged soon." "Good," Vega replied. "She deserves her freedom again." Freedom, a word I thought I'd lost forever that night on Maple Hill. That afternoon, Emily came back with a small recorder. "Want to hear another part?" she asked. "The section where Tara talked to him alone?" I nodded. She pressed play. "Tara, are you sure? What if she wakes up?" "Michael, she won't." I cut the brakes. I know what I'm doing. "Tara, and if they find out?" "Michael, they won't. They think I'm the grieving husband. They think the crash was fate." Emily stopped the playback. "No more doubts." He wrote his own sentence. Tears welled up again, not from pain, but from relief. For the first time, I didn't have to prove I deserved to live. The truth was doing that for me. When night fell, the golden hospital lights spilled across the snowy window. Emily packed up her things. Before leaving, she leaned close. "Tomorrow, I'll request your transfer to the rehab wing. You'll see the sky again, hear the birds, and start over." She held my hand, voice trembling but gentle as wind. "You taught me something, Claire, that silence has its own voice, and when justice finally speaks, it doesn't need to scream." The door closed softly behind her. I watched her silhouette fade down the hall, leaving behind a silence that wasn't empty anymore, but peaceful. Outside, snow kept falling. Each flake melted on the glass, washing away the remnants of old fear. And I knew my story wasn't over. That recording was only the beginning. Because once truth is spoken, it never goes silent again. That morning, the first thin light of Denver crept through the hospital's cold glass. I had been moved to the rehabilitation wing. No more ventilators, no sterile smell of disinfectant. Just the quiet sound of wheelchairs rolling down the hall and sparrows chirping from the small garden outside. I could sit up now, lean against the pillow, look at the pale blue sky, and sometimes even push out a sound. My voice was still fragile, barely more than a thread. But every time I managed to say yes, Emily lit up like a child who had just seen a miracle. "You'll talk again, Claire. I know you will." I nodded slightly. We both knew that what lay ahead wasn't just recovery. It was the final round. Tara Lee was still out there. The police hadn't caught her. Vega told me she disappeared right after Michael's arrest, taking company records and a few suspicious wire transfers. "We think she's still nearby," he said during one of his visits. "She's clever, knows how to vanish, worked in finance. She understands how to hide behind numbers." My lips trembled as I forced out a hoarse whisper. "She will come back." Vega nodded grimly. "I believe that too. And when she does, we'll be ready." Top 2-1. That evening, Emily brought me a letter. No name on the envelope, just a postal mark from the suburbs. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, handwriting jagged and uneven. "I haven't forgotten you. He may have been caught, but justice doesn't exist for people like me." A red lipstick stain at the bottom, unmistakable. Tara. A chill crawled down my spine. Emily read it, crushed the paper in her hand. "She's provoking you, or threatening you." I shook my head weakly. "No, she'll come." Her eyes hardened. "Then she won't leave easily." 2 days later, Vega returned with Detective Owens. They brought small recording devices and placed them discreetly around the room, one near the bed, one under my pillow. "We don't want to alarm you," Owens said, "but Tara's been trying to contact hospital staff. We believe she might attempt to reach you to finish what she started." Emily stood beside me, jaw set. "She'll have to get through me first." For the first time since the crash, I smiled. A real one. the kind that comes when fear finally gives way to readiness. That night, rain fell over Denver. The rhythmic tapping against the window sounded almost like a countdown. Emily was on night duty. She sat reading charts, glancing at me every few minutes. I couldn't sleep. The air smelled faintly of rust and cigarette smoke, the same scent I remembered from the last time Tara walked into my hospital room. Then, at around 1:20 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hall. Not the soft sneakers of a nurse, not the wheels of a cart, but high heels. Slow, deliberate, muffled. The door creaked open. A figure stepped inside, coat drawn tight, hat pulled low. She stopped in the dim light. When she looked up, I knew. Tara. She didn't look at me right away. She placed a bag on the table, pulled out a small vial filled with clear liquid. "He was an idiot," she muttered, voice raspy. "Got himself caught because he pitied you. I don't pity anyone." I wanted to scream. Where was Emily? She moved closer, uncapped the vial, and dripped it into my IV line. "Just a little. You won't feel a thing. They'll call it cardiac failure. A mercy, really." I tried to move, to make a sound, but only a strangled hiss escaped my throat. Then, the door burst open. "Step away from her!" Emily charged in, hallway light flooding the room. Vega and Owens followed, guns drawn. "Tara Lee! You are under arrest for attempted murder and assault." Tara froze, eyes darting wildly. "You have no proof. I was just visiting." Vega's voice cut through the chaos, cold and precise. "We have camera footage, your fingerprints on the vial, and Michael Donovan's statement." Her face drained of color. Michael talked. He confessed. The brakes, the insurance, you. She stood still shattered, the seductress mask gone. All that remained was a woman cornered by the truth. "I didn't mean to hurt her," she stammered. "I just wanted to see him again." Emily stepped forward, her voice steady as steel. "He's not him anymore, Tara. He's a criminal, and now so are you." Tara was handcuffed right before my eyes. As they let her out, the pounding rain on the window drowned everything else. Emily turned to me, soaked with sweat and rain. "It's over, Claire. She'll never touch you again." I tried to speak. My lips trembled. "Emmy, Lee." She froze, then smiled through tears. "God, you said my name. You said it." My voice rasped like ash. "Thank you." She leaned down, hugging me tightly. "No, Claire, you don't have to thank me. You taught me that justice begins when someone believes they deserve to live." 3 days later, Vega came by with an envelope. "Official report," he said. "The case will go to trial for both Michael and Tara. You'll be called as a witness, if you're strong enough." "I'll be there," I whispered. He smiled. "I knew you'd say that." When he left, Emily stood by the doorway. "I'll be there too." "You're not alone anymore." I nodded. Outside, the snow was melting. Drops from the roof fell in slow rhythm, matching my own steady breath, the breath of someone coming back to life. That night, I opened a new notebook. My hand trembled, but the words came clearly. Day 57 since the crash. I'm still here. I listened. I stayed silent. And now I will speak. The hospital light glowed over the page, making the ink shimmer like a quiet promise. And in that moment, I understood. My story didn't end with revenge. It was only beginning. With evidence, with justice, and with an angel named Emily Hart, who taught me that sometimes it only takes one person's belief to save a soul. I set down the pen and closed my eyes. Outside, dawn was breaking, and I knew, as the first light touched the snow, that everything old fear, deceit, silence, was finally being erased. leaving only one thing behind: the truth. I never thought I'd see Michael again, at least not while I was still breathing. Yet, that morning, in the courtroom of the Denver County Court, I sat there, a thin shawl over my shoulders, watching the man I used to call my husband being led in. The handcuffs glinted under the fluorescent lights, and in that moment I realized truth really does have a shape. Emily sat behind me, fingers laced tightly together, eyes tracking every movement of the deputies. Jennifer sat at my side, whispering, "You don't have to say much, Claire." The recordings are enough, but I shook my head, answering in a hoarse, weak, but steady voice. "No, I have to speak. Not because I need to be believed, but because I've been silent for too long." Judge Roberts entered. Everyone rose. For the prosecution, Vega and Owens, the first time I'd seen them in press suits instead of cold hallway coats. Tara was there too. Her blonde hair hung loose, her face drawn, eyes vacant. She avoided my gaze, but I knew she could feel it. The gaze of the woman she had once decided was already dead. Vega opened. "Your Honor, this case is not just about money. It is about the betrayal of trust, about a calculated plan to take a life in order to collect a $4 million insurance payout." He pointed at Michael. "The defendant, Michael Donovan, cut the brake lines on his wife's car. Then, together with his accomplice, Tara Lee, pretended to grieve while they waited for the victim to die so they could claim the insurance. But the victim, Claire Donovan, survived. She woke up, and her silence exposed everything." The courtroom fell dead quiet. Michael lifted his head. His eyes were empty. I didn't see a man who regretted anything. I saw someone who had simply lost because justice had finally found its way to him. They played the recording. The audio echoed through the room. "Michael, I cut the brakes. I knew exactly what I was doing. Tara, are you sure? What if she wakes up? Michael, she won't. I made sure of it." The sound of a pen signing, a short laugh, a long exhale, each detail like a blade slicing through the air. Some people lowered their heads, others covered their mouths in horror. The judge looked straight at Michael, speaking softly but clearly. "Do you wish to respond?" Michael drew in a breath, then gave a crooked smile. "She always had to be in control. I just gave her back the silence she chose." The gavel cracked. "The defendant will maintain order." Emily placed a hand on my shoulder. "Don't be afraid," she whispered. "Justice is speaking for you now." Then it was my turn. Jennifer helped me to the witness stand. No more IV lines, no wheelchair, just legs that still shook every time they touched the floor. I placed my hand on the Bible and looked straight at Michael. "I heard everything," I said, voice shaking but clear. "When you stood by my bed and talked about signing the withdrawal order, I heard you laugh. I heard her talk about condos in Phoenix. I wanted to die right then. But then I realized silence doesn't save anyone." I paused, glancing around the courtroom. I didn't survive by luck. I survived because someone believed me, Nurse Emily Hart, and I am here today not to seek revenge, but to prove that even when you are buried inside your own body, the truth can still breathe. A deep, heavy silence followed. Even Vega bowed his head. Then a small ripple of applause sounded from the back, not loud, but real. Tara stood up, her voice breaking. "I didn't mean to kill her. I just did what he told me to. I loved him." "You loved money," I replied, my voice no longer shaking. "And money doesn't love you back." She collapsed into her seat, tears streaming down her face, while Michael simply turned away. At 3 p.m, the court delivered its verdict. Defendant Michael Donovan, on the charge of attempted first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder, 25 years in state prison. Defendant Tara Lee, as accessory and co-conspirator, 12 years in state prison. The gavel came down 3 times, clean, final, like the last 3 heartbeats of a closed chapter. I closed my eyes and inhaled, the smell of old wood, paper, and the faint stale trace of his cologne, all mixed together, a memory I knew I would carry for the rest of my life. As they were let out, Michael turned back to look at me. Just for a second, his expression softened, almost forming the words, "I'm sorry." But I didn't need it, because apologies don't erase crimes, and forgiveness does not mean forgetting. Outside, the press was waiting. Emily and Vega shielded me. A reporter called out, "Miss Donovan, is there anything you'd like to say to those following this case?" I stopped, lifted my head, and answered slowly, voice low but steady. "Never mistake silence for weakness. Silence can save your life, if you know when to break it." A cold gust swept down the stone corridor, carrying the taste of leftover snow. I walked on, without looking back. That evening, Emily came to my apartment. A small temporary place I was renting, the window facing the Rockies, blurred under a veil of snow. She brought 2 cups of ginger tea and set them on the small wooden table. "I still can't believe how far we've come," she said. I smiled faintly, my voice stronger now. "Justice doesn't come quickly, but it knows how to find its way." She nodded, silent for a moment, then added, "I resigned from St. Augustine. I need time for myself." I studied her face. "You deserve peace." She smiled, warm light in her brown eyes. "And you deserve to live. Really live." After she left, I opened the cupboard and took out my journal. I wrote a new line. Day 83. Today they called me a witness, but I know I am more than that. I am proof that justice doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be honest. I put the pen down and stared out the window. Outside, snow was still falling. But this time I wasn't afraid of the wind, because I knew, behind every recording, every testimony, every stroke of the gavel, there are people quietly fighting for the truth. And sometimes, just one person who chooses to believe, like Emily, is enough to pull a soul back from the edge of death. Tomorrow, I'll start speech therapy again. The day after, I'll visit the school where I used to teach literature. And maybe someday, I'll tell this story. Not as a victim, but as a survivor. Because somewhere inside me, Emily's voice still echoes, steady and precise. Justice has structure. And I smile, watching the first light of sunset wash over the snow. The warm light of a new life just beginning. After the trial, Denver seemed to slow down. I still remember the feeling of walking out of the courthouse that day. Wind in my hair, a sky the color of ash, and the first snowflake of the season landing on my coat. Everyone else left. I stayed, staring at the district court plaque as if I could carve it into my memory. Justice is real, and I have seen it. But justice wasn't what I used to imagine. It didn't bring euphoria. It was quiet, exhausting. It was learning how to breathe normally again after living too long in fear. Emily was right. When everything ends, what's left is not victory. It's the beginning of recovery. I spent the following weeks at the rehab center, relearning how to speak, how to walk, how to smile. At first, every sentence was a small skirmish. My voice was raw, broken in pieces. But each time I got a full word out, I felt like I'd taken back a piece of my life. One March morning, with sunlight spilling across the wooden floor, Emily came to visit. She no longer wore scrubs, just a gray sweater and a purple scarf. She smiled when she saw me at the table, holding a book and reading aloud. "I'm reading Frost," I said, my voice still rough but clearer. "Which line?" she asked. In 3 words, I can sum up everything I've learned about life. It goes on. She gave a small laugh, resting a hand on my shoulder. And you've already proved that. That evening, I received a letter from the court. Inside was a certified copy of the judgment, bold print, State versus. Donovan. Case closed. But what made me stop wasn't the legal seal. It was a small envelope tucked inside. No sender name, just a few handwritten lines. I'm sorry, not because I loved you, but because I forgot who you were. Michael. I don't know how he was allowed to send the letter. Vega said it was the defendant's right, as long as there was no threat. I read it again and again, then folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. I did not forgive him, but I also refused to let hatred contaminate what was left of my life. A month later, I received an invitation from the college where I used to teach. They wanted me back to lead a short course on literature and truth. I sat in front of the mirror, studying a thinner face, a faint scar under my neck. In the reflection, I saw a new woman, no longer a victim, no longer someone trapped in another person's shadow, but a survivor with clear eyes and a reclaimed voice. Emily walked me to the car. You ready? She asked. I think so, I answered, my voice trembling slightly but firm. If I survived my husband's attempt to have me killed, standing in front of a class is just lesson number 2. On the first day back in the lecture hall, I carried a coffee cup and my lecture notes. When I walked in, the students stood and clapped. I smiled, a little embarrassed, but there was a warmth in my chest I hadn't felt in a long time. We're going to talk about how truth operates in literature and in life, I began. Because sometimes, stories aren't just fiction. They're proof that human beings can endure and still be able to tell it afterward. A student raised a hand. Professor, does truth always win? I paused for a few seconds, then answered slowly. No, but truth outlives lies. The room went quiet, and in their eyes I saw something I'd lost before. Trust. That night I opened my laptop. An email from Jennifer. Michael is being transferred to a federal facility. He's asked to see you, says he wants to apologize one last time. You don't have to respond. I read it without shaking, just a faint echo of the past passing through, then dissolving like smoke. I wrote back, briefly. Tell him I've heard enough. The rest, I'll live long enough to forget. The following week, Emily arrived with a small package. I was going to keep this, she said, but I think you should be the one to have it. Inside was the small silver pen, the device that had recorded Michael and Tara's entire conspiracy. I resigned from St. Augustine, she said, but I kept this. It reminds me that one person can alter an entire case simply by believing truth is worth fighting for. I turned the pen in my palm, feeling the cold metal. It used to be the tool that started my nightmare, I said. Now it's proof that I walked out of it. One late spring afternoon, Emily and I sat on the porch of my small place outside the city. The sun was setting behind the mountains, gold spilling over the roofline, melting into the last of the snow. She asked me, if you could go back, would you do anything differently? I thought for a moment, then answered, I'd speak sooner. I stayed silent too long because I was afraid of losing him, afraid of shattering the perfect marriage. But now I know silence doesn't keep anyone. It only preserves the lie. She nodded, gaze drifting outward. You know, sometimes I still hear your voice in my head from when you couldn't speak. The way you blinked to spell each letter. I think that's when you were at your strongest. I laughed, the first genuine laugh in months. We both fought in our own way. And we both won, not by revenge, but by continuing to live. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I opened the window and let the air carry the last scent of melting snow into the room. I looked up at the sky, at the starlight reflected in the glass. On the table, the recorder pen lay beside my journal. I opened the journal and wrote the last line of the day. Day 120. I have spoken. I've been heard, and I have lived. Justice is not an ending. It is a chance to begin again. I closed it, listening to the soft thud of paper against leather, and allowed myself a small smile. Tomorrow, I'll teach the last class of the semester. Next week, I'll visit the hospital to see Emily. She's now heading a support program for young nurses. And this summer, I'll travel alone. My first trip without fear. I won't bring the past with me. Just one thing I know for certain. Justice doesn't give back the time stolen from you, but it gives meaning to the years you have left. And as I turned off the light, it felt as if someone in the wind was repeating what Emily once said at St. Augustine. Justice isn't revenge, it's repair. I closed my eyes and let that sentence dissolve into the dark, knowing that finally, I was truly free. 2 years have passed since the trial ended. Denver has changed shades. Winter no longer feels as heavy, and when snow settles on the rooftops, I don't feel afraid anymore. I still live in the small apartment by Sloan's Lake, where in the mornings, sunlight filters through the curtains onto the wooden table and the ginger tea I make for myself every day. My voice is back, deeper, rougher, but with a weight it never had before. When I read poetry in class or tell my story to students, they sit in silence, not just because of the words, but because of what sits beneath them. Truth, spoken by someone who has stood at the edge. Emily calls every week. She is now head of nursing at the new St. Augustine Center in a unit named the Heart Wing, a rehab ward for patients recovering from neurological injuries. Every time we talk, she still jokes the same way. If it weren't for you, I'd probably still just be a nurse buried in paperwork. You turn me into someone who believes in miracles, Claire. I laugh. No, Emily. You're the miracle. Life has returned, but it isn't the same. I've learned how to hike, how to be silent without being afraid, how to open up to people again, even though the old scars still ache when the weather turns. One April morning, Jennifer came by. She brought cinnamon pastries and an envelope from the law office. Good news, she said. The insurance company has officially released the full payout. You can use it however you want. I didn't ask how much. Money was never the main currency in this story. But Jennifer's voice dropped lower as she added, Have you thought about writing your story? Not as a case file, as a book. I looked out the window where early light was just dissolving on the lake surface. If I write it, I said, I won't write about the crime. I'll write about the people who saved me, about courage in a white coat, about a nurse who refused to give up. She smiled. And you know what? That story will heal more people than any verdict. That summer, I went back to St. Augustine. Not lying on a hospital bed this time, but walking on my own legs, slow, steady. The new building was brighter, walls painted cream, corridors scented faintly of jasmine. Emily met me at the entrance, hugged me tight, her voice shaking. I never thought I'd see you come back here and still be smiling. I didn't either, I said, but I realized this place didn't hurt me. The memories did, and now they're just part of who I am. She led me down the corridor. At the far end, a small brass plaque hung on the wall. The Donovan Fund for Patient Recovery, established by Claire Donovan and Emily Hart. I named it that. Are you okay with it? Emily asked, a little shy. I nodded, smiling softly. I am. Because for the first time, that name stands for something, right? Every week, I teach a small class for patients, people relearning how to speak and write after injury. I ask them to write a single line each day, what they feel, what they want, what still makes them feel human. One man who'd had a severe stroke told me, You don't know this, but sometimes just writing, I'm still here, is enough to keep me going. I smiled. I do know. I wrote that exact sentence in a notebook 2 years ago. The room laughed. And in their laughter, I heard my own, steady, unafraid, real. One early autumn day, Emily called me out to the porch. She set a brown envelope in front of me. "You'll want to see this," she said. "It's from federal prison." I opened it. Inside was a printed letter, signed Tara Lee. "I know no one wants to hear from me, but I've given a full statement. I'm in a rehabilitation program here. I see you in my dreams every night. Not when you were dying, but when you looked at me without hatred. If you ever write your story, please say this much. I finally realized I chose the wrong person to believe in." I finished reading and stayed quiet for a long time. Emily asked softly, "Will you write back?" I shook my head. No. Forgiveness doesn't need to be mailed. It just needs to exist. That night, I went down to the lake. The water was still, like glass, reflecting the city lights. I tossed a small stone in and watched the ripples spread outward, not stopping. In my mind, Emily's words came back to me. Justice isn't revenge, it's repair. I smiled. Justice had done its part. Now it was my turn. To repair the parts of my life that had been left undone. A few weeks later, I finished the first draft of my book Silence Became My Weapon. I wrote the whole journey. No glossing over, no melodrama. I wrote about the first light through the ICU blinds, about the smell of Emily's midnight coffee, about the machine beeps I once hated and later blessed. When I sent the manuscript to a small press in Boulder, I didn't expect much, but 2 months later, the editor called, voice thick with emotion. "Your story proves what we've always believed, that telling the truth is itself a way of surviving." Winter came again. On the book launch day, Emily stood next to me, holding a bouquet of white jasmine. The room was small, just a few dozen people. Students, patients, a handful of old colleagues. When I took the microphone, my heart beat slowly, evenly. 2 years ago, I said, I lay in a hospital bed and listened to the man I loved talk about my death. But I also heard the voice of an angel who believed I was still alive. I'm not telling this story to dwell on the crime. I'm telling it to say this. Sometimes, truth begins with a single blink and ends with one person willing to listen. The room held its breath, then broke into applause. In the front row, Emily wiped her eyes, and I laughed, softly, like the breeze that once slipped through the recovery ward window. When the signing was over, a young student came up to me. "Miss Donovan," she said, "I was in an accident too. I was afraid I'd never speak properly again, but because of you, I know I can still write, still tell my story, still live." I took her hand and said quietly, "Then tell your story. That's how the world knows we're still here." That night, back home, I set the jasmine bouquet on the table and opened the window, letting the cold air flood in. Outside, snow had begun to fall, light as breath. I lit a small candle and placed it beside an old photo, Emily and me, standing in front of St. Augustine. The flame flickered, and I whispered, not to anyone else, just to myself. I lived. And I told it. Because sometimes, simply telling it is enough to keep the truth alive. Part 11. 2 years later. 2 years have passed since the day the trial ended. Denver has changed color. Winter is no longer as heavy as before, and when snow covers the rooftops, I'm no longer afraid. I still live in the small apartment by Sloan's Lake, where in the mornings, sunlight cuts through the curtains, falls onto the wooden table and the cup of ginger tea I still make for myself every day. My voice has come back, lower, rougher, but with a weight it never had before. When I read poetry to my class or tell my story to my students, they listen in silence, not just because of the words, but because of what lies behind them. Truth, told in the voice of someone who has stood at the edge. Emily calls every week. She now manages nursing at the new St. Augustine Center in a unit named Heart Wing, a rehab ward for patients recovering from neurological trauma. Every time we talk, she keeps her familiar joking tone. If it weren't for you, I'd probably still just be a nurse buried in charts. You turned me into someone who believes in miracles, Claire. I laugh. No, Emily. You're the miracle. Life has returned, but it isn't the same. I've learned how to hike, how to be silent without being afraid, how to open my heart again, though sometimes the old scars still ache when the weather shifts. One April morning, Jennifer came to visit. She brought a bag of cinnamon rolls and an envelope from the law office. "Good news," she said. "The insurance company has officially released the full payout. You can use the money however you want." I didn't ask how much. Money has never been the important part of this journey. But Jennifer went on, her voice softer. "Have you thought about writing your story? Not as a case file, as a book." I looked out the window, where the morning light was dissolving on the lake's surface. "If I write," I said, "I won't write about the crime. I'll write about the people who saved me, about courage inside a white coat, about a nurse who refused to walk away." She smiled. "And you know what? That story will heal more people than the verdict ever could." That summer, I went back to St. Augustine. Not to lie in a hospital bed, but to walk on my own legs. Slow, steady. The new building was brighter. The walls painted a warm cream. The corridor scented with jasmine. Emily met me at the door, hugged me so tightly her voice broke. "I never thought there'd be a day you'd come back here and still be smiling." "I never thought I could either," I answered. But then I realized this place didn't hurt me. The memories did. And now, they're just part of me. She led me down the hallway. At the very end, a small brass plaque hung on the wall. "The Donovan Fund for Patient Recovery. Established by Claire Donovan and Emily Hart." I named it that. "You okay with it?" Emily asked, a bit shy. I nodded, smiling lightly. "I'm okay." Because for the first time, that name stands for something right. Each week I come in to teach a small class for patients, people learning again how to speak, how to write after injury. I teach them to write a single short line each day, what they feel, what they want, what still makes them feel human. One man who'd suffered a severe stroke told me, "You have no idea. Sometimes just writing 'I'm still here' is enough to keep me alive." I smiled. I do know. I wrote that exact sentence in a notebook 2 years ago. The whole room laughed, and in it I heard my own laughter. Not shaky, not afraid, but real. One early autumn day, Emily called me out onto the porch. She set a brown envelope in front of me. "You'll want to see this," she said. "It's a letter from federal prison." I opened it. Inside was a printed page signed Tara Lee. "I know no one wants to hear from me, but I have confessed everything. I'm in a rehabilitation program in here. I dream about you every night. Not the way you looked when you were dying, but the way you looked at me without hatred. If one day you write your story, please say that I finally realized I chose the wrong person to believe in." When I finished reading, I was silent for a long time. Emily asked softly, "Will you write back?" I shook my head. No, forgiveness doesn't have to be sent in a letter. It just has to exist inside. That night, I went down to the lake. The surface was still as glass, reflecting the city lights. I tossed in a small stone and watched the ripples spread outward, endlessly. In my mind, Emily's voice echoed, "Justice isn't revenge. It's repair. And I smiled. Justice had done its part. Now it was my turn to repair the parts of my life that had been left undone. A few weeks later, I finished the first draft of my book, Silence Became My Weapon. I wrote the entire journey, no sugarcoating, no sensationalizing. I wrote about the first light slipping through the hospital blinds, about the smell of Emily's midnight coffee, about the sound of the monitors I once hated and later thanked. When I sent the manuscript to a small publisher in Boulder, I didn't expect much. But just 2 months later, the editor called me, voice unsteady. Your story proves what we've always believed, that telling the truth is itself a way of surviving. Winter returned. At the book launch, Emily stood beside me, holding a bouquet of white jasmine. The room was small, just a few dozen people. Students, patients, a few former colleagues. When I took the microphone, my heartbeat was slow, steady. 2 years ago, I lay in a hospital bed and listened to the man I loved discuss my death. But I also heard the voice of an angel who believed I was still alive. I'm not telling this story to revisit the crime. I'm telling it to say this. Sometimes, truth begins with a single blink and ends with one person willing to listen. The room fell silent, then applause rose. In the front row, Emily wiped her tears, and I smiled, as softly as the breeze that once slipped in through the recovery room window. When the signing ended, a young student walked up. "Miss Claire," she said, "I was in an accident too. I was terrified I'd never speak properly again, but because of you, I know I can still write, still tell, still live." I took her hand and said quietly, "Tell your story. That's how the world knows we're still here." That night, back home, I set the jasmine bouquet on the table and opened the window, letting the cold wind pour in. Outside, snow had started falling, light as breath. I lit a small candle and placed it beside an old photo. Emily and me, standing in front of St. Augustine. The flame flickered, and I whispered, not to anyone else, just to myself, I lived. And I told it. First, because sometimes simply telling it is enough to keep the truth alive. 1 year after Silence Became My Weapon was published, my life had grown quieter, but sharper, deeper than ever. The book was being read in therapy groups, passed around in psychology classes, and strangers were writing to me, telling me they too had survived on the fragile belief that truth can still be heard. I no longer taught full-time. I chose a single small class on Thursdays and gave the rest of my time to writing, watering plants, and walking slow circles around Sloan's Lake. Every morning, I made ginger tea, opened the window, and watched the mist lying thin over the water. The same mist that 2 years ago terrified me, now made me feel at peace. Some nights, I still dreamed of myself lying motionless again in the ICU, monitor beeping in strict rhythm, footsteps, low voices. But in those dreams, I wasn't afraid anymore. I saw Emily. I saw light pushing in through the doorway, and I knew the dream was no longer about death. It was about the fact that I had come back from the edge of it. One October morning, I received a letter from the federal prison in Florence. Thick envelope, gray seal. Sender, Michael Donovan. I held it for a long time, that old metallic chill running up my spine, as if the past had come to knock once more, politely, for the last time. I brewed tea, sat at the table, and opened it. Inside were 5 pages, handwritten in the familiar slant, firm, controlled, the same hand that once wrote Christmas cards to me. Claire, I don't know why I'm still writing. Maybe because in a cell, no one listens. I've thought 100 times that you'll hate me for the rest of your life, and maybe you should. But there is something I need to say. I don't know when I became that man. I let ambition and arrogance kill whatever was human in me. Every night I hear you crying, not in reality but in memory. And I know there is nothing I can say now that will make you believe I ever loved you. But I did. I just didn't deserve to. I stopped there. No tears. Just the cold scrape of memory across my ribs. The next lines were shorter. If one day I walk out of here, I won't look for you. But if there is another life, I hope I meet you again, somewhere without hospitals, without insurance, without filthy numbers. Just two people who once loved and then lost. Michael. I folded the letter, put it in the drawer, right under the recorder pen Emily had returned to me. No shaking, no fresh wound reopening, just a strange stillness, the kind that arrives when you finally know a chapter is truly closed. That afternoon, I took flowers down to Sloane's Lake. Jasmine petals slid onto the surface, carried far away. Cold wind cut across my shoulders, bringing with it the scent of an early winter. I spoke quietly, maybe to him, or maybe just to myself. No one can repair the past, but anyone can choose how to live what's left. A few weeks later, Emily stopped by with a small box. Inside was a delicate silver necklace, a thin chain with a heart-shaped pendant engraved with 2 letters, C-E. I think this belongs to you, she said. C for Claire, E for Emily, because we saved each other. I laughed, a light laugh I once believed I'd lost. You have no idea, Emily. There were days I thought you were the first voice I heard after the dark. If anyone's name belongs on this, it's yours. She shook her head. No, you're the one who chose to live. I just knocked on the door. I touched the pendant, the silver catching light like a small shard of those first days I started finding myself again. That winter, I accepted an invitation to speak in Boulder. Theme: silence, survival, and second chances. The auditorium was full. I stood on stage under warm, not blinding, light. I told my story, no longer shaking, no longer hiding. People ask me what made me survive. I don't think it was a miracle. It was people. One person believed I was still here. One person refused to give up. And me, the one who decided silence would no longer be a prison, but a weapon. When I finished, the entire hall rose to its feet. Emily sat in the front row, eyes wet, and in hers I saw the same thing I'd begun to see in my own reflection. A freedom that doesn't shout, but is real. That night, back home, I opened my laptop and typed the first line of a new book. Not a memoir, a series of letters. Title: Letters from the Living. I wrote, "To those who have ever been swallowed by silence, I know the fear of not being heard. I know what it's like to watch someone you love calculate over your life, but I also know this. As long as there is one breath left, you can still alter the story. Don't wait for justice to knock on your door. Knock first." I paused, listened to the wind outside, then typed the last line of that page. Living well isn't revenge. It's the quietest form of justice. I closed the laptop and looked around the small house. On the wall, the framed photo of Emily and me on the day Heartwing was inaugurated. On the table, a cup of ginger tea, still steaming. On the chair, silence became my weapon, its margins filled with notes and messages from readers everywhere. A letter from Canada, an email from South Korea, a card from an old woman in Nebraska, all of them saying the same thing. Your story made me believe there is still a tomorrow. I answered them quietly, out loud, to no one in particular. Yes, there is always a tomorrow. If you're hearing this story now, believe this. What you've been through does not define you. The way you stand up afterward does. Outside, snow had started again. I opened the window and let a few flakes fall into my palm. They melted the instant they touched my skin, leaving small, warm drops of water. I whispered, almost like a private ritual. justice isn't revenge, it's repair. And I knew that somewhere, in a hospital, in a classroom, or just inside someone listening, a person would decide to begin again from the truth they'd finally found. If you're listening to this now, tell me where you're listening from, because each city, each voice, each person who has walked out of the dark adds one more small candle to this world. Leave a comment. And remember, living well is the most elegant answer you can ever give to anyone who once wanted you silent.